Hello, this is Dave Adams. So what I'm going to demonstrate with this particular setup is my COVID project, which was scratch building a On3 model of the second named Parlor car Durango. This is one of these fun projects where there was not too much to go on. So what I had to work from was one photograph taken by Richard Jackson in 1936. This was just before the car was rebuilt and then renamed the Gunnison for use on the streamlined narrow gauge, if you will, the Shivano that ran between Salida and Gunnison, Colorado. The other photo that I had available was also taken by Mr. Jackson on the same day, and that was a photo that he shot from the end platform looking down the interior of the car. And so this particular photo that I had scanned out of a book contained all kinds of good information that was really helpful in modeling the car. The other thing I was able to get a hold of were two folio sheets from the railroad itself that basically kind of covered this car from when it was constructed in the 1880s up through the last rebuild in 1936. The car was sold to the railroads in Mexico in 1942, disappeared south, and I haven't seen any pictures of it since. So with hardly anything to go on, we decided we could build this. So what I'm going to do is show you how the car turned out, and then I'm going to try and show you some of the fixtures and other little aids that I had to make in order to help me build this thing. The car was really interesting. There were a number of things I picked up off the folio sheet and photographs, and in particular, photographs of sister cars that were involved in train wrecks on that, because train wrecks, for some reason, were always photographed. And it was good that they were, because a lot of times, these being all wooden cars and heated with coal stoves and other things like that, is you got your photographs and then got out of the way, because what then happened is, of course, the train burned up. So the only thing you really had left were smoldering embers and iron and some steel. So the photographs of a particular couple of wrecks on the Rio Grande Southern of sister cars came in really handy in understanding some of the details, particularly the roof details and the oval window that you can see here in the ladies' toilet actually did exist. It said it did on the folio sheet, but then there's always some questions because the folio sheet isn't always exactly as the car was built. So this is the one side of the car, and we'll turn this around and we can take a look at the observation platform here. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to build this car. To bring up the train I'm running on, the rear end of the train I'm running on my railroad. I really wanted a parlor car that basically had a real live end platform and railing on it. And the Durango seemed to fit the bill for that. Looking at the other side of it, it's a little bit more mundane, no oval windows. And you're able to see again the interior seats. These were all swivel seats on the interior. Capacity was 18, let's see, a little over about 20 passengers. There were 16 back here on the in the chair portion of it. And then there was a men's smoking room that could accommodate four gentlemen in there. So that was essentially what they did. I don't know if these cars made that much money, but they seemed to be popular, and they ran them. The non-fancy end of the car is just an indoor open platform and steps to get up and down. The roof of the car, what you've got here is this is a smoke jack for the Baker heater that was inside. And that is what supplied heat to the car, and it was a kind of a recirculating water system. So you would have had water pipes running the length of the car on each side of the car, sort of beneath the seats, and that they radiated heat from there, just sort of like a steam heater or a hot water heater in old buildings. The tank on the roof here that was also part of the Baker heater system, and it was the reservoir for the water that basically provided water to the system as it used it, and also acted as, if you will, the reservoir for expansion and contraction as the water heated up and cooled down. The other things on the roof, you can see there's a line that runs from one end of the car to the other, and that was the gas line for the pinch gas lamps that were in the car. You can tell the pinch gas lamps because they basically had one vent above the center of that particular lamp. Where you're seeing the two vents, that was a kerosene lamp, and this car had both gas and kerosene lamps as part of the deal. The underbody of the car was built up from what I could discern in photos and what real grand practice was for underbodies of passenger cars at the time. The parts down here, these are all brass, and I thought, the whole car itself is pretty much plastic. I thought for the underbody, I did want to build this out of brass just because I enjoy working in that medium. The brake reservoir, the plain triple valve, and the brake cylinder, those are all brass castings, and the carry irons, the levers, clevises, and everything else is, not the clevises. The clevises were also castings, but everything else basically was bent up and fabricated from brass strips. In my case, the train lines go through to the end of the car. We've got the rods and the chains for the handbrakes at either end of the car that go through the end, and we're set up. The thing that's interesting about these cars, you can see here, is the queen posts. They were of an earlier design, and they seem to have a diagonal brace support rod. And because they didn't seat the truss rods did not seat as fully into the queen post as on later designs, is they seem to have another rod that was basically bolted to the side of the needle beam going across here, and what it had was a loop at one end and bolted into the side of the needle beam, and that surrounded the truss rod, and I think pretty much kept it in place as things flexed and bounced over the railroad. Fabricating those things was a lot of fun, and I'll show you some of the fixtures that I developed to do that. Well, let's see. At this point, let's see if I can get both hands in here, and we'll pop off the roof. See what we've got in here. So the first thing we'll take a quick look at, because there's really not much to see, is the interior of the roof. And here you can see there are two kinds of lamps up here. One of them is the thing that looks like a spider with a body in the center. Those are the pinch gas lamps. And the bottom of it was the lens. That's where the mantle for the thing was, and the upper body was I guess the rest of the stuff there. And then they basically vented up through the roof. The double lamps, those were your standard oil lamps that were used on an awful lot of passenger equipment in the early days. And again, it suspended from the ceiling. You had the oil reservoir in the center, and that basically fed the lamps on either side of it. And again, two vents up through the roof. So that was it. The interior of the car was interesting, and I thought because the windows were so big, I was going to need to put some sort of an interior in here, just so it looked like there was something in here. And it turns out the interior was really simple, and the good news is it did not change from the early construction of the car up through the time it was rebuilt as a Gunnison. So you can see on the left end there's a closet that's kind of white inside. I decided not to put any detail in there. That's where the Baker heater was located, and seeing as how you can't see it with the roof on, there was no point in modeling that. Opposite the Baker heater closet is the gentleman's bathroom. And well, it's really not visible here, as you can see the top of a quarter-shaped water tank. Down below that is a counter with a sink in it, and over in the corner that you can't see is the dry hopper. Immediately moving toward the rear of the car, you can see the two benches, or two sofas, as they were called in the folio sheet, that are in the men's smoking section. And then right following that is a very small closet that's in the image here is all dark. And then again, you can see above that another one of these quarter-round water tanks, and a sink down at the bottom, and maybe a dry hopper in the corner. And there's the oval window. So that is the women's toilet. And so that's what you had. So this end of the car here, looking at it, is what they had on here was a big mirror up on the wall, and down below the mirror was a niche, and that niche basically was where you got your paper cup of water. On that, the railroad did furnish water to passengers, and that water niche was supplied by the reservoir that was in the ladies' toilet. And similarly, there was another niche down at this end, and that basically was supplied by the water tank that was in the gentleman's toilet. What you had were a number of swivel chairs in here. These were scratch built out of necessity, and I'll kind of talk about some of the fixtures and things that I used to build those. What I was really looking for wasn't a detailed model, but a representation that when you look through the windows, you would basically see the chair backs and also the head coverings on top of them. The head coverings were done actually with just white decal sheets, so that worked out real slick. Then on the top, and I did not add all of the rods up there, that's the overhead rack for small parcels and purses and things of this sort here that passengers could stow up there. To make life easy on myself, I decided I was going to use Grant Line window castings, Grant Line trucks, Grant Line steps, and the Grant Line end beams for Denver Rio Grande Western passenger cars, and that was going to save me an awful lot of fussy building if I did that. So once those decisions had been made, is I needed to see how all this stuff was going to fit together. So the first thing I did is I sat down with a piece of paper and a T-square, and I basically drew up the car from the folio dimensions on this. And the real reason for this was to test fit pieces of evergreen styrene, and in particular the Grant Line windows here to where I got the window spacing and other things that I thought would look about right, because a lot of those details are not included on the folio sheets. So you're on your own for determining that by counting number of boards and figuring out how wide a passenger car siding was and scaling from there. So once that was done, I then set about basically fabricating the body out of evergreen styrene and strips. And while I was doing that, that gave me some time to think about how was I going to build the roof. The crossing gate kit line years ago came up with a way where John Busby basically formed parts of the roof out of styrene using his kitchen stove, a homemade vacuum form box, and then homemade forms for that. And later on, a friend of mine named Don McKinney, who's a just absolutely wonderful modeler, he decided that he needed to build some passenger cars for his railroad. Only they were going to be South Pacific Coast passenger cars, and again he needed roofs. So he basically called up John Busby and said, John, I need some help, and how did you go about building the roofs? So between the two of them, is John invited Don over, and Don made up the wooden molds and everything for his roofs. And when he was all done, is he was good enough to publish this great article in the Gazette a number of years ago. And for some reason, I remembered he'd done that. So I got out all my gazettes and plowed through those until I found this article by Don on how he vacuum formed roof parts. So essentially, after reading that, I thought I was in business. So I knew I could build a vacuum forming box, and I knew I had a vacuum cleaner I could use to pull the suction with. So what I needed now was how to do the roof forms. Yeah, both Don and John said they basically carved, filed, and sanded their roof forms to shape. And I thought, boy, that's not something I'm particularly good at. I had to come up with some tooling, if you will, in order to try and make this easier. So after I determined what I thought would be a decent radius across the roof, both on the upper and lower sections here, I had that. I was able to then sit down and make up some templates like these. There's for the lower section there. So this gave me a template to measure progress against. And then the same thing for the upper section here. Again, these are just made up out of white styrene. And then as far as how is the end going to fall, well, here's a template here for getting the fall over the end. But again, I was worried about how I was going to do this. And then I thought, well, because I've chosen a constant radius for those two things, I should be able to come up with a sanding fixture, which I did. So the sanding fixture is this. It's just a piece of plywood that was left over from some other project. This radius right here is cut to the radius that I wanted to have for the upper and lower radiuses of the two roof pieces here. And this right here is 80 grit belt sander paper that's glued on with sanding disc cement. And this piece was then clamped in a vise. And I took a large block of basswood that I had that was the right length and cut those to the approximate dimensions. And then just by, if you will, drawing those blocks of wood back and forth through this fixture held in my vise and cleaning off the sawdust here periodically, actually quite frequently, and checking progress, against my templates, we eventually ended up with a pattern here for the lower roof section that looked like this, and with another pattern that basically looked like this for the upper section. Now the little blocks on the end, those were added after I started trying to vacuum form things and discovered that in the vacuum form box I needed to have a little bit more height on each of these to pull the plastic down. And in the boxes, the two items just basically sat, if you will, side by side. So I ended up with this big sheet that it had, if you will, a tall loaf of bread and a small wide loaf of bread in it. And those, just like Don said in the article, those were then cut out with a hobby knife and cleaned up, and then became the three pieces here for the roof section. The next thing I didn't know how I was going to do were the swivel chairs in the parlor end of this car. Again, the one photo I had basically had chairs at all different angles, so that gave me a fairly good idea of what these things look like. I thought, it was suggested that I could learn CAD and have these things 3D printed, which actually would be the real hot setup for somebody that wants to do that. But I thought, well, I wanted to be able to get this thing done, and it probably would take me a good part of the rest of the year or longer to learn how to do CAD and then get things to actually print at shapeways. So I decided that if I could figure out how to fabricate these up out of styrene, that I could plow along with my lower skill level here and do that and make it all work out. So these are not contest-winning chairs. They aren't going to amaze anybody, but they serve the purpose, which is they look like chairs in a parlor car when you're looking at the car through the windows from the outside. So what I ended up doing is breaking these things down into several different pieces. One of them was the chair back, the other was the chair seat, then the chair base, and then the pedestal, and then the arms, and then the arm supports. And so I figured if I could sit down and figure out how I could mass produce those, we'd be in pretty good shape. Well, the chair back itself wasn't just straight up and kind of rounded over at the top. It kind of came up, went out around where the head would be, and then back in. And so I did some fooling around, and I made some trial and error out of styrene, some shapes that looked about right. And when I had one, I took that and said, okay, to mass produce that, if I make something out of brass, such as this little gadget right here, which is a piece of brass. The top part of it is what the seat back is. The bottom part is just a couple of brass L's that were soldered to this. And then what you would do, or what I did, was slip in the right thickness and width of styrene in here, flip this over with an X-Acto knife. I could trace around the outline of the brass here, and then that gave me the chair shape. And then at that point, as I could use a variety of implements of destruction to hack my way up to the lines that I had scribed on the styrene around the outside. So that's how all of the chair backs were fabricated. The seat cushions were a lot easier. Again, that was just styrene, and it was mostly rectangular, so I just had to cut a rectangle on that and do the corners. The pedestals in the pictures appeared to be fancy, and they were kind of fluted. So I just simply simulated that by taking 10,000 styrene, and again, cutting a number of rectangles of 2 different sizes, and then stacking them up. And so that automatically provided the flutes, and then you drop the seat cushion on top and the chair back on the rear, and you're pretty much ready to go. The chair arms, again, there were 2 things. The chair arms are easy. Those are just strip styrene that were just sort of, if you will, filed and sanded to a rounded shape on the top, left flat on the bottom, and then kind of rounded on the front and the rear. But the chair supports were going to be a different story. So again, I made up something out of styrene that I thought, okay, will look reasonable. It's certainly not a replica of what was in the prototype photo, but from a distance it works. And I knew I was going to need a bunch of those. So the way I came up with that, this is just a piece of brass channel. And what I did was basically file the side profile of the chair arm supports in the side, and then it was a matter of basically feeding again styrene strip stock in here, and then using these notches and things, cutting everything out, using the hole in the center to drill the hole in there. And then when I was done, as I had another fixture to where each of the finish sections was cut to length. So that took care of that. And the pedestals, those were, that's just aluminum that was turned. In my case, I've got a Unimat lathe, and I just turned those freeform. And the aluminum basically came from an old wind chime. I didn't see the need to go out and buy really good aluminum for that, given that for the most part those bases were going to be all but visible. And you said you can barely see them in here, and you can't even really see them through the windows. So that's what we did there. So all in all, it kind of gave me a way to fill up the car and make it look like we were ready for business. Yeah, the last real headache I was going to face was how to do that fancy back railing. And so what I ended up doing from photos of the Gunnison plus the one photo of the outside of the Durango here is I basically was able to scale from those and basically draw the railing as it appears that the railroad or the car builder had originally built it. From there, that was too fancy. I simplified it, figuring maybe I could get Shapeways printed if I could get that done in 3D. Well, it turns out the Shapeways processes are not able to hold the as fine a dimensions as I wanted. So a friend of mine basically took my drawings, turned those into CAD, and then basically set up tool paths. And then he cut those railings out of 15 thousandths clear acrylic on his CNC mill. And then I got these little parts and then assembled them, and it just turned out great. So that's another thing about this hobby is you got to have friends that know what they're doing, because they're going to be able to help you out. The last item here that we'll just quickly cover is this little template right here. What this is just a piece of white styrene with some other pieces of styrene on it that were 10 thousandths thick, and this bunch of things here was what I used to hold the microscope slipcover glass in. Well, I cut them all to size in order to do the window glazings. And so if you take a look at the back of the car, we've got 2 different size windows back here, the one being the door, the other being the side lights on either side of it. Each of the windows down the side of the car has upper and lower, which are different sizes. And then the end of this car here again has a window on it with yet different size glass to be cut in there. And so that was all done with essentially the help of this, and all of the different dimensions on there just show me where I needed to do the cut lines. I made sure this corner up here was square, because then that allowed me to use machinist square here to line everything up, and then run the diamond tip scriber across the microscope cover glass and pull that up, put it on an edge, and then just snap it clean. So that worked out real well. I hope you've enjoyed the COVID-19 project. I'm glad I got it done. I've been wanting to have this car for years, and it's finally true. And I had a lot of fun building it. I hope you have fun with your working on your own creations.